Am I good enough? That silent question echoes in the hearts of countless men today. For some, it lingers after a breakup. For others, it emerges in the presence of a partner. And for many, it becomes the hidden force behind decisions, risks, and life's direction. The desire for female approval is not just a personal quirk, it is a cultural script. A script that men inherit without permission, rehearsed until it feels like identity itself. But where does this longing come from, and why does it hold such unshakable power? To understand this, we must travel backward into childhood, into culture, into biology, because the roots of approval seeking are woven deeper than surface behavior or charm. At its core, this is a story about worth, belonging, and the search for significance. And it is a story that does not have to end with dependency, but with transformation. Many men grow up learning that love is conditional, that affection must be earned. A boy whose parents were distant or critical often grows into a man who doubts himself. Instead of resting in an inner sense of value, he looks outward for constant affirmation. Every compliment becomes oxygen, every disapproval a blow to his fragile foundation. Psychologists call this anxious attachment, where love feels always at risk of vanishing. And in adult life, that anxiety often zeroes in on women as the gatekeepers of worth. When self-esteem is shaky, female attention becomes not just desired, but essential. This is why a man may bend his preferences, silence his truth, or chase approval. Deep down, he is not just seeking romance. He is pleading for proof that he matters. And yet, no amount of outside validation can permanently fill that inner void. People-pleasing often becomes the default strategy for men caught in this pattern. They anticipate every reaction, contort themselves to avoid conflict, and sacrifice needs. Their energy drains into a constant performance, a hope that harmony equals survival. But harmony purchased at the price of authenticity is never true harmony at all. Over time, they forget their own voice, their own desires, their own rightful boundaries. The relationship becomes a mirror of approval rather than a meeting of equals. And when that approval fades or falters, panic and despair quickly take its place. It is as though every ounce of identity hangs on a single fragile thread of validation. This is not love in its fullness. It is love as addiction, where fear masks itself as devotion. And breaking free requires courage, not only to love differently, but to live differently. Culture pours gasoline on these psychological sparks by linking masculinity to conquest. From films to locker room talk, the message is clear. A man without a woman is a failure. Romantic success becomes shorthand for strength, status, and even human legitimacy. The player, the ladies' man, the conqueror, all of these are glorified male identities. And the man without female approval is mocked as weak, incomplete, or undesirable. This is why men brag about conquests to friends, perform for male peers, and chase status. Ironically, what looks like pleasing women often doubles as performance for other men. Because in many groups, female validation is less about women and more about rank. This pressure begins young, with teasing over virginity or who secured a prom date. It is pure approval dressed up as romance. Identity measured by external trophies. The media amplifies this cycle by scripting male heroes whose journeys end at the altar. The victory is not complete until he gets the girl, as though she is the ultimate prize. Advertisements whisper the same message: buy this car, wear this cologne, win her gaze. And so, men absorb the idea that worth is achieved only when a woman confirms it. Social media intensifies the effect, making comparison an hourly ritual of inadequacy. Images of couples, influencers, and celebrities reinforce unattainable expectations. The silent message seeps in: without female validation, you are less than whole. And men, deprived of other safe spaces for emotional expression, internalize it deeply. Cut off from friendships where vulnerability is welcome, they lean entirely on partners. A girlfriend becomes not just a companion, but the sole lifeline for affirmation and care. This dependence explains why so many men dread singleness more than women do. Studies show that young men report greater unhappiness in single life compared to women, because society taught them to place their emotional eggs in one fragile basket. Without female approval, they often feel not just lonely but fundamentally incomplete. This is why longing transforms into desperation, and desperation into resentment. In some corners of the internet, this resentment curdles into hostility, even entitlement. Communities of men, convinced they deserve validation, rage at its absence, blaming women. But beneath the anger lies the same wound, the terror of being unworthy on their own. These cultural scripts are powerful, yet they are not inevitable. They can be rewritten. And rewriting begins with exposing the myths and questioning the foundations of worth. The evolutionary perspective adds yet another layer to this intricate story of approval. For thousands of years, male survival often hinged on winning a mate's acceptance. Those who displayed traits appealing to women passed on their genes more successfully. Whether through strength, risk-taking, or resource provision, men competed to impress. Even today, studies show men take greater risks when observed by attractive women. A skateboarder pushes harder, a driver speeds faster, a performer seeks to dazzle. Testosterone spikes, instincts flare, and the body itself rewards the act of display. It is biology's whisper: prove yourself worthy or risk being forgotten. But biology is not destiny. The same brain that urges risk can also choose reflection. We are wired to seek approval, but we are also capable of transcending the wiring. Understanding these layers, psychology, culture, and biology, gives clarity. It explains why the need for female approval feels so deep, so undeniable, so universal. But it also reveals why so many men feel shackled, restless, and perpetually unsatisfied. Because chasing approval is a treadmill. It never ends, it only accelerates. The more you depend on it, the more fragile your identity becomes. The more fragile you become, the more desperately you chase. And round it goes, until exhaustion replaces joy. The way off this treadmill is not to despise approval, but to reframe it. Approval must shift from being the oxygen of existence to being a bonus, not the source. It is here that the path to freedom begins, and the story turns toward transformation. Breaking free begins with awareness, because what is unconscious cannot be changed. When a man names the forces that shaped him, he stops being ruled by them in silence. Awareness is like switching on a light in a room he thought was dark and uncharted. Suddenly, the habits that once felt natural reveal themselves as learned survival codes. And what is learned can be unlearned, challenged, and reimagined into something freer. But awareness alone is not enough. It must be paired with courage to act differently. Courage to risk disapproval, to hold boundaries, to reclaim the voice once silenced. Courage to disappoint in order to remain authentic, even when fear claws at the edges. Every act of defiance against the old pattern becomes a small but vital liberation. And from these acts, a new identity begins to take root, one built on choice, not fear. One of the most radical shifts comes from redefining the meaning of self-worth. As long as worth is outsourced, it remains vulnerable to the weather of other people. But when worth is cultivated from within, it becomes an anchor instead of a sail. A man can then stand rooted even when storms of rejection or criticism blow fiercely. This shift requires a deep rewiring, often beginning with how he speaks to himself. Instead of self-criticism, he must practice self-acceptance as daily resistance. Instead of asking, "Do they approve of me?" he asks, "Do I honor myself here?" Self-respect becomes the compass, and integrity becomes the fuel for decisions. It is not arrogance, but alignment, a quiet authority that grows from the inside out. And with time, this inner authority becomes visible to others as authentic strength. But transformation is never purely individual. Relationships are the testing ground. Because it is easy to declare independence in theory, but harder in the face of love. Partners, friends, and even strangers will test boundaries and call old patterns back. The man who once said yes to everything must now risk the discomfort of saying no. The man who once apologized for existing must now stand steady without shrinking. Relationships either reinforce old wounds or become arenas of new possibility. In healthy love, approval-seeking gives way to mutual respect and shared freedom. The partner is no longer a judge, but a fellow traveler. No longer a savior, but a friend. The bond shifts from conditional acceptance to unconditional presence and choice. And in this shift, intimacy deepens, because truth replaces performance at last. Society often portrays independence as isolation. But true freedom is connection, not the kind of connection built on neediness, but on presence without condition. Men who heal this pattern do not withdraw from women, they learn to love differently. They bring wholeness into the relationship instead of demanding wholeness from it. They can celebrate their partner's affection without depending on it for identity. And paradoxically, it is this very independence that makes love feel richer and freer. Because nothing suffocates love more than desperation disguised as devotion. A man who no longer begs for validation offers something far more powerful: choice. He is not in the relationship because he needs it to survive, but because he desires it. And this choice makes his presence not just stable, but deeply trustworthy. At this stage, another transformation emerges: purpose beyond the realm of approval. Because once approval is no longer the axis of life, space opens for something greater. Men rediscover ambitions once silenced, passions once buried under fear of rejection. They take creative risks, start businesses, pursue art, or seek meaning in community. The same energy once spent on anxiously pleasing now fuels authentic contribution. And in that contribution, they find what approval never gave: a sense of legacy. Not legacy in the form of trophies or partners won, but of lives impacted and changed. Purpose rooted in service, creativity, and authenticity offers a lasting foundation. It endures even when relationships shift, even when external applause fades to quiet. And with purpose, self-worth finds a deeper home than any external approval could offer. Yet the journey is not linear. It is filled with relapses, doubts, and familiar cravings. The approval-seeking impulse does not vanish overnight, but weakens through practice. Like any addiction, it resurfaces in times of stress, loneliness, or vulnerability. But each relapse is also an opportunity to recommit, to remember the deeper goal. The difference is no longer perfection, but resilience, the choice to return each time. Progress is measured not by never slipping, but by rising faster and stronger. And with every return, the new identity feels less like effort and more like home. This is what psychologists call integration, where change is woven into daily rhythm. It no longer feels like a performance, but like the most natural way of being. And when change becomes natural, freedom ceases to be a concept and becomes life. Community plays a decisive role and anchoring this new identity of freedom. For centuries, men found their worth not only in romance but in brotherhood. Tribes, guilds, and circles offered spaces for men to be seen beyond conquest. But modern culture has often left men isolated, starving for meaningful fraternity. Without community, the temptation grows to place all needs on a single partner. But with community, men rediscover belonging that is not tied to female approval. They laugh, create, support, and challenge one another without judgment. And through this, they heal the wound of conditional acceptance from childhood. Brotherhood becomes a rehearsal space for authenticity before love ever demands it. And when men are held by men, they carry less desperation into the arms of women. The most powerful symbol of this transformation is the shift from scarcity to abundance. Approval-seeking thrives in scarcity, the belief that love is rare and must be hoarded. But abundance declares that love flows not from others first, but from within outward. When a man realizes he already contains the worth he seeks, he stops grasping. He stops fearing that rejection is death, because rejection cannot erase his identity. From abundance, he can give without manipulation and receive without desperation. This abundance is not naive optimism, but hard-won clarity through pain and healing. It is the realization that wholeness was never missing, only forgotten in the noise. And remembering this truth is the quiet revolution that ends the cycle of approval. It is not about escaping women's influence, but about escaping dependency on it. Freedom from approval seeking is not about rejecting love. It is about reclaiming choice. It is about choosing relationships out of desire, not desperation, and truth, not fear. When men reach this stage, they no longer measure life by how much they are desired. Instead, they measure it by how much they live in alignment with their authentic voice. The applause of others may still feel good, but it no longer decides their direction. They can walk away from situations that diminish them without fearing they will vanish. They can receive criticism without collapsing, and receive praise without dependence. And in this balance, they find something approval never offered: genuine peace of mind. Peace that does not require constant proof, but flows from a steady internal ground. This is where the journey reveals its deepest gift: sovereignty over one's own identity. To live sovereignly is not to live selfishly. It is to live responsibly from inner strength. Because when men stop needing constant validation, they stop draining those around them. They no longer demand their partner carry the impossible weight of being their mirror. Instead, they show up whole, offering love freely instead of bargaining for self-worth. This shift transforms not just romance but every sphere: work, friendship, community. A sovereign man leads not by domination, but by the quiet authority of authenticity. His presence no longer screams for approval. It radiates steadiness and clarity. And others instinctively trust that steadiness because it does not depend on performance. Leadership born from inner worth is contagious. It inspires others to do the same. And in this way, one man's healing ripples outward, changing the culture around him. We often think cultural revolutions require protests, policies, or mass movements, but sometimes the most radical act is deeply personal: reclaiming your own worth. Because when enough individuals shift from dependency to sovereignty, cultures shift. The myths about masculinity being tied to conquest begin to lose their power. The scripts that equate manhood with female approval begin to feel outdated and hollow. Young boys watching see new examples: men who are confident yet vulnerable, strong yet kind. They see men who do not beg for validation but embody value in their daily actions. And these boys inherit a different model of masculinity, one rooted in authenticity. This is how cycles of wounding are broken, not by rejecting women, but by rebalancing love, by remembering that love is richest when it is chosen, not clung to as a lifeline. Yet, even at the end of this journey, there is no final arrival, only ongoing practice. Because approval seeking will always whisper, a remnant of childhood and biology. The difference is that now the whisper no longer controls, it simply reminds. It reminds men to return to their foundation, to remember the work they have done. It reminds them to stay grounded, to keep building communities that nourish authenticity. The whisper becomes less a threat and more a signal to reconnect with inner worth. And in this way, even the old wound becomes a teacher, guiding growth with humility. True mastery is not erasing the impulse, but living above it with clarity and freedom. Mastery is knowing that love can be cherished without being chained to it. And in this knowing, men find not just independence, but deeper, healthier intimacy. For the man listening now, perhaps these words stir recognition deep in the soul. Perhaps you hear echoes of your own story, the times you bent yourself for approval, the times you lost your voice, abandoned your truth, or feared being left behind. And perhaps you also feel the possibility of something more, a life not ruled by fear. The journey forward will not be easy, but it will be worth every step you take. Because freedom is not abstract. It shows up in the way you carry yourself each day. It shows up when you say no without apology and yes without fear of abandonment. It shows up when you chase purpose over popularity and meaning over validation. And in these choices, you prove to yourself again and again that you were always enough. Not because someone approved of you, but because you reclaimed your worth from within. So let this be the reminder: the search for approval is not your destiny, only your story. And stories can be rewritten, myths can be challenged, cycles can be broken for good. The longing you carry is not weakness, but a signal pointing you back to yourself. It points you toward the courage to stand alone so that you can love without chains. It points you toward the power of brotherhood, purpose, and authentic living. And it points you toward the truth that your worth was never conditional to begin with. The approval you have been chasing is not out there. It is waiting in your own embrace. When you see it, when you claim it, everything else becomes overflow instead of oxygen. And in that overflow, life takes on a richness that no external validation can replace. This is the freedom you were made for, and it has been waiting for you all along.